Hey guys, welcome. You are watching and or listening to the I Must Stand podcast. I am Travis. This is Brad. The I Must Stand is more than just a podcast, though. It's more than a YouTube video series. It is a commitment, and we are excited to jump in today. We have someone who is very special to us who has joined us today. So, Brad, go ahead and tell us who we're talking to.
Yeah, I'm excited to get to introduce Dan Tocchini, one of our good friends and co-workers. We're working together to put together some pretty transformational weekends. You've probably heard of those in some of our previous episodes, the Wake Weekend. But yeah, really looking forward to it.
Welcome, Dan.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. I really look forward to this. Always excited to talk with the two of you.
Well, it is a privilege. So Dan has coached us. Dan has hosted transformational events for both Brad and I. We're both big fans of Dan, and looking forward to jumping into today's topic because it's a big deal to a lot of what we talk about on the podcast, inside of our events, inside of coaching. And Brad, I'll let you facilitate that. So start us off.
Yeah, so I kind of wanted to jump into the topic of taking off the spacesuit, which is something that we've worked with Dan on a few times. But I'd like you to kind of, Dan, talk about what the spacesuit is. How does it serve us? Where does it show up? Like, what are the payoffs? Just you're really good at pulling that facade down.
I don't know if it's a facade. It's more of it's built into us biologically. You know, the metaphor spacesuit is great because the spacesuit protects you from, a harmful atmosphere, right? It keeps you alive in a situation where without it you would perish, right? So metaphorically, we have, we use that to describe what human beings do to stay alive, right? We call it the survival mechanism, or our fight or flight reactions or tendencies are keep us alive. And the actual spacesuit, this body, is built in. It's got two basic commands. It's got two basic objectives, and the first one is to keep it alive, to keep our body alive, and whatever looks like it's going is a threat, well, we're going to either fight, we're going to either fight, flight, follow, fool, or freeze in order to keep ourselves alive. Whichever one is most effective, our body will automatically react and try to put us in that situation in danger, in that situation of danger, put us in a place where, and have us act in a way that will keep us alive instinctively. And we don't have to think about it. That's built right into the amygdala in our brain. And the second objective the spacesuit has is basically to save energy in case it needs it to keep us alive. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means if I think you come to sit down and you want to have a conversation with me because I did something that either didn't work for you, offended you, something like that, and you want to make sure we're still aligned, or you have a beef to handle with me. When you come to me, if I feel threatened, I'm going to probably get defensive, which would be a fight syndrome, or I might just agree with you even though internally I'm disagreeing, so I'm kind of going along with you. So, fight, flight, follow, fool, or freeze. So I could be following you or fooling you just so I can get by. Because I don't want to tell you what I really think, because I'm afraid if I do, you're going to, hurt me somehow, take something away from me that I need, maybe your approval or some kind of provision that that you provide either at work or at home, that kind of thing. So we have these things operating in us automatically, and they're not bad things. They're actually good things. There is a time for us to do that. That's why they're built into us. That's what keeps us alive. But we tend to whenever we feel threatened, we tend to automatically get triggered in some way to protect ourselves. And the minute we do that, the neocortex in our, which is our thinker, the the executive processor in our brain, it goes along the top part of our brain. It covers the top of it, and it's where we process information and where we can think originally. That shuts down, and we get reactive, and the amygdala takes over, and it will instinctively begin to protect us. Now, in a relationship, if we're trying to sit down and have a conversation and resolve something and really move on together in a mission, like in a family or in an organization, a church or a community or a small group, or at work, that becomes problematic if all I'm going to do is defend what I did. If what I did didn't work, then that means I'm going to continue to do that because I'm defending it.
Right.
And if you have feedback for me about that, if you have some ideas about how we could work better together, if I don't get that I'm safe, or that it's okay for me to come out, to take the spacesuit off, that the atmosphere is something that's going to be beneficial to me and not harmful, then I'll stay locked in my defensive mode. And
Yeah.
part of it,
When we talk about the biological like predisposition to the spacesuit, what shapes the spacesuit? Because we all have a different spacesuit, and it all comes from like a biological perspective, but it also is different for every person, and we have the ability to change that spacesuit at any time.
yeah, so it comes from what we've made up about what happened to us in the past.
Yeah.
So if I grew up with a schizophrenic mother, and she was manic depressive schizophrenic. So, and it kicked in when I was about 10 years old, 11 years old. And so I began to understand, if I wanted to survive, I had to anticipate what was coming. And so, but I made up to myself that, based on my mother at that time and through that period of time, I made up that women can't be trusted because I could never trust who was going to show up. Now, that started out as a conscious thought at one point, but it got built into my spacesuit, because not trusting how she would show up was a way for me to, okay, who's here, test it, then respond accordingly, depending on what I had to get done. So so that stays with me. So now when I go out into my life and I become attracted to other women and want to have a family, I start to suspect them whenever they do things that I can't predict, or that seem aggressive or dangerous to me emotionally. And so I have an automatic reaction that will protect me. Like, I might shut down, that's the flight, and not say what I think, and I maybe later on attack, right? Because, the old passive aggressive kind of behavior, that kind of thing. So anytime I interpret, the way we know, by the way, we're starting to move into this, we're going to put the spacesuit on rather than take it off, is when we hear this language: there must be something wrong with it or them or me. Something wrong, bad, or broken with it, them, or me. When I hear myself starting to evaluate what's going on around me like that, I know I am climbing into my suit and preparing to protect myself. And another biological sign of that is, if you have something you want to say to me, and you say, Dan, I need to say something. I need to talk to you about something that's not working for me. If I listen, if I think what you're saying to me or is something I've already heard, something I already know, something you've already told me, like that, I might feel like I might say to you, well, there's something wrong with you. We already talked about this, right? Something wrong, bad, or broken. What's up? That do we need to talk about this again? rather than, oh, I see, Brad or Travis wants to talk about this again. We must not have dealt with it. I wonder what's missing. Now that's a different way, but usually if I react, then I'm just going to push you away, like I don't have time for it, or what's wrong with you? You already talked about this, don't you remember? Right? So you can hear the language. What's wrong with you? Or what's wrong with me? I thought we talked about it, right? Many, it depends. We have our own defaults. I usually go to what's wrong with you, and my wife usually goes to what's wrong with her, and sometimes we go to what's wrong with it, the thing we're doing. So that's all part of the dance, and being able to clue into that can help me interrupt it and come out from behind the suit and listen to what's there and see what's wanted and needed, right? And begin to engage it from purposeful or intentional manner.
Yeah. I love that the way that you've laid that out, and even giving some indicators as to when you know that you're going into the spacesuit or when you're operating from the spacesuit. What do you say is a good step for someone that maybe as they're listening to this, they recognize that they've been operating in the spacesuit and they want to jump out of it, but they feel like they can't? So what's a good way to help them step out of that?
Well, first off, let's just talk about that a little bit, and then we could talk about what comes out of it. I mean, whenever you find yourself saying, this is a waste of time, you really don't know that. And I'm not saying that as an anecdotal or an opinion, but the research that's been done by Harvard, and there's a great book out there called Thank You for the Feedback. It's a summation of a 10-year study about how to determine what feedback to listen to and not listen to. And one of the things they discovered is that you have to really listen to the things you don't want to listen to discover if they're really worth listening to again. So think about that. So we very quickly go to, I don't want to waste my time, because you can feel it. That's a biological reaction in the suit. I really want to get that clear, because for so long that plagued my relationship with my wife. I thought I knew what she was going to say. And many times I did, but once she said what I thought she was going to say, there was something behind it that she was going to say, or she was trying to say something but didn't have the language for it. And that's why she kept saying over and over again, talking about a subject we already talked about. She's trying to get language to communicate what is going on for her, because she doesn't feel I heard it, or she's not communicating it clearly. And when I started to get that, I really had a lot more patience or margin or space to hear what she had to say, even though I initially felt in my body that, oh, here we go again. You know that feeling.
Right.
Now, the way to disintermediate this automatic reaction, and by the way, each of us, as Brad said, have a different spacesuit or strategy for keeping ourselves alive based on our past and what we made up about the past, which has significance, because we don't remember the past. We remember what we made up about the past. That's, again, a neuroscientific fact, not Dan's opinion. And so because we react to what we made up, we can always re-mean the past. So to your point, Travis, how I have to first be able to connect with what's going on for me and test it against what's really going on in the conversation to see if I'm just reacting and that there's something new to consider. And if I have a hard time considering what's new, there's probably some past assumption that's interfering, like static with me, and it feels like emotions. I can't listen beyond my emotions. Well, there's probably something there that needs to be re-meaned, a way you're looking or viewing the past that needs to be re-meaned. So for instance, when I got married, I dated my wife for 5 years and married her. and we married. And I was a womanizer. The first 5 years, for the first 9 years of our relationship, every September, for some reason, I would go out and have a fling. And when I confessed this to her, I didn't realize it was every September. But in confessing it to her, she, we worked through a lot of, we worked through and talked about it. And I asked her to forgive me. And we, she said, yes, I will, but I don't know if I want to stay with you naturally. And so we spent in separate rooms in the house that we were living in so we could talk. And I've told the story many times, but long story short, after about a month, we were arguing about, I wanted her to help with the finances because we bought a home and what it would cost to live was eating away at our savings. And I knew we only had about a year that we could make it like that. And by the end of the year, we would be in trouble. We'd have to have, more money. And so I kept asking her, would you help? And she would say, yeah, I'd help. And then I'd say, well, no, you wouldn't. You just said you wouldn't. And we argued. Well, long story short, she came out with a tape recorder to tape record the conversation so we could hear it. And I said, okay, go ahead. Because I was so confident she was wrong or something wrong with her. And as we talked, we got into this argument. We forgot the tape recorder was on, and I'm saying, well, I need some help. She says, I'm willing to help. I said, no, you're not. And I was getting ready to storm out of the house because that was my backup strategy. That was my spacesuit protecting me, flight. And she says, no, don't run. Don't go run out now, Dan. Let's talk about it, because I had run out 2 days previous. And let's listen to the tape recorder. So she turns the tape recorder on, and I'm listening. And here's what she said. She said, I'm willing to help. I said, no, you're not. She goes, yes, I am. I'm willing to help. I'm just not willing to let Danny. I don't want Danny to go to a babysitter. And I go, see, you don't want to help, because I didn't think there was any other way. And I heard that on the tape recorder. I turned it off. I go, okay, you said you wanted to help, but you didn't mean it. And then she started crying. Like I hurt her feelings. And I thought she was manipulating me, because that's obviously something I made up my mother would do. And because sometimes my mother would do that, sometimes she wouldn't, but I made up that she would do that. And I thought my wife was doing that. So I thought, I'm a street guy, so got a lot of street savvy. So I said, okay, so in my mind, in this attitude, like my attitude is, okay, smarty pants, what would you do? And she said, okay, I thought you'd never ask. She pulls out her purse, and in her purse is a 2-page business plan for a daycare that she would start at the house. And we had a big backyard and extra rooms. And so in the new house. And so when I saw that, I was stunned. It wasn't something I thought of. I realized I'd never given her a chance. Like, I'd never even asked her for it. And this was the third time we talked about it. And I had blown out 2 other times. And I thought she was trying to manipulate me. And I thought to myself, wow, where did that come from? So at that point, we started communicating in ways we'd never communicated, because all of a sudden I was very interested in what she saw. I realized I really didn't know this woman. I only know who I made her up to be, and I made her up to be something she wasn't. Where did I get that idea? And I realized that's how I saw my mother. And as I started looking back, up until that point, I couldn't remember anything that I enjoyed about my mother from my past. I only thought of her as a kind of a antagonistic force, which was a deep part of my issues with my wife at the time, leading up to this. And so I started looking into that. I said, well, man, maybe my mother's not who I think she is. And so I started revisiting what I made up about my mother. And I started listening to my mother and realized what a hero she was, because she still took good care of us. It was just crazy, hectic, but she never neglected us. It was rare that occurred. And if it did, she herself would commit herself so she could get some care. And then I would work with the kids and so on, and my dad, etc. But I realized what a hero she was at that point, and I remeaned my relationship with her, which really opened up a whole new relationship with Eileen. And so it produces a whole different way of being. When my wife had an issue, I could embrace it. Even if I got a defensive at first, I could listen through the defense. It would calm down. I could I could interrupt it for the sake of what I wanted to have with her and with the kids. And incidentally, we had been staying in separate rooms talking to see if she wanted to remain in the relationship at this time that we had these discussions. And one night I came home, and on my pillow was a note telling me to come back to bed. She was wanted to stay and reconcile. We were reconciled in the relationship, but she wanted to stay with me and invited me back into my bedroom. And that was a huge time. But I know it had everything to do with that tape recorder and my wife's willingness to care enough about me to have me see my own bias and prejudice toward her at the time, and that I really wasn't listening to her.
Yeah, I think back to even past instances in my life. The clues have always been there, whether they're in the language, whether they're in the action, whether they're in the result. The clues are there, and the awareness of those clues is what we're fighting for.
Yeah, exactly. Being able to see those clues in the frame of your future, not the frame of defending yourself from something that happened to you and preventing it from ever happening again. Right? It's like that's what the human mind always looks to the past to produce the future. So the future I usually project is one that's prejudiced or biased based on what I made up about the past. So if I dare make a commitment that's bigger than what I think is possible based on those prejudices, and this is the benefit of visioning bigger than what you think you can accomplish, then when I start to go for it, it's going to bring to the surface um, ways of thinking that have limited me up to that point, and they're going to feel very powerful. They're going to persuade me to go in the opposite direction of the future that I want, because the future I want is going to look like a threat based on what I decided in the past. And that gives me the opportunity to remean the past, to be able to presence the future that I've never had and long for now. And that's a real process. It's at the core of what we're going to do in the Wake Awake program with I Must Stand. That's at the core of it.
And it's to Brad's point about the clues and the things that are there. You can't see them when you're so convinced that you're right about it. When you think that is the way that reality is, and that I think that was something that even as we were doing our coaching with you, just even the simple question, I referenced it in an earlier episode of our podcast, but you can't prove that, or the statement, you can't prove that, or how can you prove that? Just really starts to shake some things that you think are just gospel. And it blows my mind as we talk about it, like how quickly we can grab hold of this is how it is. So it gives a little, maybe that's even a little bit of an indicator of, whoa, the where I just bucked up this strongly, there's got to be something potentially there.
Yeah, and there's ways to to identify them, right? There's ways of standing when something comes up that can be very helpful to resource and to identify and break through or disintermediate the influence of our own survival thinking. Because, survival thinking is really valuable when you're in a survival situation, but it's not very valuable when you're trying to innovate, take new ground, do something new, and you're going into territory you've never been in. And not only are you going into new territory, but that territory reminds you of something in the past that hurt you, that you vowed in your mind never to have happen again. Right? That's a whole deal. So, there's some things I anchor into, and that we work with people in our work to anchor into. Because when you and I, the three of us, work together, and when we work with a group, we're not just working with the group, we're working with ourselves while we work with the group.
Yeah.
And that's part of the process. Is I've got to really master myself before I can lead anybody else. And mastering myself requires me to be very well acquainted and continue to be acquainted with what I have made up about myself, the past, you, the world around me, etc. It's a vigilant process of awareness. And there are ways to inquire to help accelerate or that transformational process. And the first one is to really get committed to something bigger than yourself, bigger than your need to gratify your desires on a continual basis. Like is there something big enough that you're willing to suspend your need to be gratified immediately, and that you're willing to suffer for something you care enough about, that you're willing to suffer immediately for it over a period of time, because you get it's going to bring a crop that's worth it. That's probably one of the biggest breakthroughs of mankind, is the ability to put off immediate gratification for long-term gain, right? But you got to have something in mind that's big enough that you're willing to do that for, that you get what's at stake if you don't do that, right? You get what you could lose. And then the other thing I know is a blast, at least it's one of the best challenges I like to engage in, is to, my grandfather used to tell me, Junior, you can't explain your way out of what you behaved your way into. So often I find myself thinking that I can explain my way out of something that I've behaved my way into. So I've got to get to that place where I can say, you know what? I earned this. I earned what I got with my wife right now, or my children, or my partner. And I may not like it, but I earned it. And I wonder how I earned it.
Yeah, how did I get here?
Yep. And how can I, dealing with this, forward what it is I'm committed to? And am I in touch with what might shut down if I don't? Like, what's at stake in the future if I don't deal with this now?
Yeah.
Right? Like what I don't confront now usually defeats me later.
Right.
Right. And that's
that shit sandwich.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
But then, of course, there's, I don't just deal with situations in the moment because it may not be appropriate in the moment, but I'm thinking to myself that I'm going to set up a moment so I can deal with this that's appropriate and the other person can feel welcomed and invited. Then I'm going to set that up as soon as I can, because I know suspending it's going to just build a bigger shit sandwich down the road.
Yeah.
So if I'm hearing you right, whenever we need to have a tough conversation, we know we need to have a tough conversation, and the pit in our stomach that makes us want to avoid that at all costs, it's a biological thing.
Yes. We don't think there's a possibility of dealing with it. That's why mostly people don't want to deal with conflict, because they can't see how to handle it, or it reminds them of conflict that they never dealt with in the past, like maybe when they were kids and they didn't have the power to, or their parents weren't capable of it, or didn't have the skills, and people broke up around it. And so people just go, no way, I don't want to get into that again. And they back off. And then that elephant just sits in the middle of the room of their relationships and rots the relationship.
Possibilities we leave on the table.
Right on. Now, look, there's some practices a person we can do. I know I work with these a lot because I need to, because I am very opinionated and I have my own ideas. And, like I said, it's good to know your own reactions. Like, I have reactions I'm not proud of, and they're still there, right? Like I can be attacking. I think there's, if something goes off and I go into survival, it must be somebody else or something else. It must be something wrong with them or it. And then I'll get to me later, maybe. So if I can catch that, and I know that about myself, I don't need to get rid of that. Like this is one of the big things is that we have a tendency to go, I just can't be a good father if I don't stop being angry at my kids. Well, no, actually, no, that's not, you can't get rid of the anger. The idea is, what's the anger telling you? Like what is, when the anger comes up, what is it really going on with you? And if you can discover that, then the anger becomes an ally because it's signaling to you that rather than attack this person, you might want to look internally and see what you might be afraid of.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times anger, at least for men, is a cover up for fear. And that's how we get ourselves through really frightening situations. There's an appropriate time to be angry, but not when your daughter comes to you to talk about the guy down the street that she's falling in love with.
Maybe the wrong case.
That's right. And then like your fight syndrome there, your survival mechanism is only going to drive your daughter away from you, and somebody else is going to raise her, right? So how can I stand, right? So here's like when I bring that up because I went through that with my daughter. But one of the things I talk about and I work to train people in is if you can hold your opinions like a hypothesis and let yourself look in like, hey, this is an opinion. I'm going to look at this hypothesis and I'm going to make a decision based on it. But that decision is only an experiment. So I hold my opinions lightly. Like I've got them, and I believe in them, but I'm also curious about what I might be missing. So I'm going to hold them like an hypothesis, and the decisions I make out of them as an experiment to see if the hypothesis is working. And then I'm going to argue with you as if I'm right, but I'm going to listen to you as if I could be wrong.
That's so good.
I still want to be, I still want to, I'm going to say what I think and have my opinion. But when you speak to me, I'm going to listen to see how I might be wrong. Maybe I could be wrong. And if I can find an area where I'm wrong and I can admit it with you, it's going to deepen our trust and probably in the relationship. And we'll be able to talk even more about the sensitive issues.
Yeah. And I think that it's important. It's imperative, actually, that we be able to recognize that we all can fall into this. We all have these strategies that we use. And it, like, if you think you're the one that's not the issue, that's an indicator. It's a pretty big indicator. Because that was the thing for me. Like, it was very easy for me to assume that I was not as bad as the next guy. Like, we're all criminals, sure, but there are worse, and that lie of reasoning robbed me of being open to other possibilities. The judgments were made, the beliefs were held, and there was nothing I could see past that. Because you were breaking them down. You know how strongly I would hold certain positions, and you could say, like, you can't prove these things, and you have no empathy is available to you because you can't look past your own judgment.
Yeah, there are three key questions I like to ask in a conversation, especially if somebody is dogmatically plugged in to what they believe is so, even though the evidence is showing them it's not. And so they'll say something about, this is the way that it is. And I'll say, compared to what? And then, and then they'll say, well, this, and this, and I think we should do this. And I'll say, well, at what cost? And then they'll, what? Because most of the time, I know me, I haven't thought about, like, this isn't working. Well, compared to what? Like, I could say to my daughter, this isn't working. And she has said to me, compared to what? And then I have to think about, well, compared to what I want you to be. Well, that's different than, well, wow, that's, I remember her saying, compared to what, Dad? Like, how do you know this isn't working? Like, she didn't say this, but what I heard was, this is my process. If it's wrong, then what am I to do? Like, compared to what are you talking about?
Right.
Right. And then at what cost? Like if we do this, or if I say this, or this person says something to me and I don't understand what they mean and I don't even know what it's compared to, and then they tell me, and then it seems logical, then the next question is, but at what cost? If you think about this pandemic we just went through, nobody wanted to hear at what cost about these lockdowns, and now apparently 80 million people have died, or around the world, 80,000 people in the U.S. died, not 80 million, 80,000 people over and above what died of COVID died as a result, they estimate, and maybe more as a result of the lockdowns and everything we did, right? So that's a high cost. And that was a concern of people coming in, but it was shut down. Just like in a relationship, we often shut down what somebody's saying. They're trying to tell us the cost it's going to have for them with us, and we don't hear it because we want to be right about what we want to do.
Yeah.
Right. So at what cost? And then the final question I like to ask is, to your point, Travis, is what hard evidence do you have that this is so? Because if any of those questions can't really be answered, there's an opening to investigate.
Yeah.
So when we look at taking off this spacesuit idea, we never really get to take it off. We get to change the way we interact with it, the way that it serves our future.
Right.
But we never really get to take it off.
Yeah, I think metaphorically we do, but in this, just maybe we don't. Maybe it's just me imagining, but in this way is what I think. Like if you think about a flow state, right? You and I, when we're talking and we're conscious of ourselves, we're processing about, they estimate 60 to a few, maybe 1,000 kilobytes a minute. But our brain's taking in 4 million bytes a minute. So we're naturally biased, and we have a pretty incredible brain because it can put everything together. But if I realize that I'm only seeing a very small, like the scripture says, I see through a glass dimly, then I'm going to be curious about what I'm not seeing. And that's something I have to keep reminding myself about, because my natural survival mechanism wants to be certain that I'm going to be alive in the next moment. So anything that could be potentially frightening, I don't want to see. It's scary, but I do want to see it, but I don't. It's like this ambivalence.
Right.
So, I mean, you know what I mean? When you sit down and talk to somebody and it's a hard conversation, what do you feel like before you sit down? Right?
Oh yeah, the nerves, the anxiety.
Oh God.
It's wild how after doing this work and going through these coaching sessions, it's like it didn't make that easier. I just know the feeling, I'm just more aware of it.
Yeah, I think the thing that that helps people get courageous is to see a new way to process it, a new way to engage it. And that's why it's important that I start with myself first. I've got to master myself before I can lead anybody else well. And if I master myself, then I'm able to hear difficult things and find possibility in them and come together. I mean, we've been through some breakdowns together, and I think both the way you and Travis, the both of you have worked with me, has been very helpful in holding what we're committed to in a sacred place and finding ways to accomplish it without making anybody right or wrong or bad, and like that, or giving credit or taking credit away. It's just been more about the vision, and it makes us more resilient together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, Dan, we don't want to take any more of your time. I love being around you, love listening to you. Excited to see you in April at our first Wake weekend, and see you in February for Revenant Process. Is there anything else you want to bestow upon us before you bounce out?
Well, you guys, people can locate me at takenewground.com. And I'd love people to know about our podcast, which is the Naked Leadership Podcast on Apple and on Spotify. And, if you're interested, we'd love to hear from you. Love to, we like to get people interactive. And if we can serve you in any way, we'd love to. We're committed to standing, and I Must Stand as part of, we're partners with you, and we love to be part of what you're doing. And we're excited about the future, because we're going to take what we do and modify it and supercharge it for what we're doing with guys out there. And I Must Stand. I'm looking forward to it.
Heck yeah.
Looking forward to it. Well, if you've gained anything from this, if you've resonated with what Dan said, if you've seen some of these areas show up in your own life, be sure to share this podcast with a friend, like it, and until next time, thank you.
Thank you.